We arrived in Moscow on New Year's Eve and rode by bus from the Drab airport through a dusting of snow, past St. Basil's Cathedral, to a big party with a lot of incredibly friendly, fun loving Russians. My business has always been a way to get me into exotic places and allow me to meet interesting people. If I make any money from those trips, that's just the icing on the cake. Modeling markets as machines. I was really getting my head into livestock, meat, grain, and oilseed markets. I loved them because they were concrete and less subject than stocks to distorted perceptions of value. While stocks could stay too high or too low because greater fools kept buying or selling them, livestock ended up on the meat counter where it would be priced based on what consumers were willing to pay. I could visualize the processes that led to those sales and see the relationships underlying them. Since livestock eat grain, mostly corn, bracket, and soy meal, and since corn and soybeans compete for acreage, those markets are closely related. I learned just about everything imaginable about them. What the planted acreage and typical yields were in each of the major growing areas, how to convert rainfall levels in different weeks of the growing season into yield estimates, how to project harvest sizes, carrying costs, and livestock inventories by weight group, location, and rates of weight gain, and how to project dressing yields, retailer margins, consumer preferences by cut of meat, and the amounts to be slaughtered in each season. This wasn't academic learning. People with practice in the business showed me how the agricultural processes worked, and I organized what they told me into models I used to map the interactions of those parts through time. For example, by knowing how many cattle, chickens, and hogs were being fed, how much grain they ate, and how fast they gained weight, I could project both when and how much meat would come to market and when and how much corn and soy meal would be consumed. Likewise, by seeing how much acreage was planted with corn and soybeans in all growing areas, doing regressions that showed how rainfall affected the yields in each of those areas, and applying weather forecasts and rainfall data, I could project the timing and quantity of corn and soybean production. To me, it all looked like a beautiful machine with logical cause-effect relationships. By understanding these relationships, I could come up with decision rules or principles bracket I could model. These early models were a far cry from the ones we use now. They were back of the envelope sketches, analyzed and converted into computer programs with the technology I could afford at the time. At the very beginning, I did regressions on my handheld Hewlett Packard HP-67 calculator, plotted charts by hand with colored pencils, and recorded every trade in composition notebooks. When the personal computer came along, I could input the numbers and watch them be converted into pictures of what would happen on spreadsheets. Knowing how cattle, hogs, and chickens progressed through their stages of production, how they competed for meat eater dollars, what meat eaters would spend and why, and how the profit margins of meat packers and retailers would influence their behaviors. For example, which cuts of meat they would push in advertisements bracket. I could see how the machine produced cattle, hog, chicken prices that I could bet on. As basic as those early models were, I loved building and refining them, and they were good enough to make me money. The approach to price determination I was using was different from the one I had learned in my economics class, where supply and demand were both measured in terms of quantities sold. I found it much more practical to measure demand as the amount spent, insisted as the quantity bought, brackets, and to look at who the buyers and sellers were and why they bought and sold. I will explain this approach in economic and investment principles. This different approach was one of the key reasons I caught economic and market moves others missed. From that point on, whenever I looked at any market, commodities, stocks, bonds, currencies, whatever, I could see and understand imbalances that others who define supply and demand in the traditional way, bracket, as the units that equal each other, bracket close, missed. Visualizing complex systems as machines, figuring out the cause-effect relationships within them, writing down the principles for dealing with them, and feeding them into a computer so the computer could make decisions, air quotes, for me, all became standard practices. Don't get me wrong, my approach was far from perfect. I vividly remember can't lose, air quotes, bet that personally cost me about $100,000. That was most of my net worth at the time. Most painful still, it hurt my clients too. The most painful lesson that was repeatedly hammered home is that you can never be sure of anything. There are always risks out there that can hurt you badly, even in the seemingly safest bets. So it's always best to assume you're missing something. The lesson changed my approach to decision making in ways that reverberate throughout this book, and to which I attribute much of my success. But I would make many other mistakes before I fully changed my behavior. Yep. Always assume that you're missing something. All right. Building the business, bold. While making money was good, having meaningful work and meaningful relationships was far better. To me, meaningful work is being on a mission I became engrossed in. And meaningful relationships are those I have with people I care deeply about and who care deeply about me. Think about it. It's senseless to have making money as your goal, as money has no intrinsic value. I agree with that. Its value comes from what it can buy, and it can't buy everything. It's smarter to start with what you really want, which are your real goals, and then work back to what you need to attain them. Money will be one of the things you need, but it's not the only one, and certainly not the most important one. Once you get past having the amount you need to get what you really want. When thinking about the things you really want, it pays to think of their relative values so you weigh them properly. In my case, I wanted meaningful work and meaningful relationships equally, and I valued money less. As long as I had enough to take care of my basic needs, in thinking about the relative importance of great relationships and money, it was clear that relationships were more important because there is no amount of money I would take in exchange for a meaningful relationship, because there is nothing I could buy with that money that would be more valuable. So for me, meaningful work and meaningful relationships were and still are my primary goals, and everything I did was for them. Making money was an incidental consequence of that. In the late 1970s, I began sending my observations about the markets to clients via telex. The genesis of these daily observations, grains and oilseeds, livestock and meats, economy and financial markets, was pretty simple. While our primary business was in managing risk exposures, our clients are also called to pick my brain about the markets. Taking those calls became time consuming, so I decided it would be more efficient to write down my thoughts every day so others could understand my logic and help improve it. Leverage. It was a good discipline since it forced me to research and reflect every day. It also became a key channel of communication for our business. Today, almost 40 years and 10,000 publications later, our daily observations are read, reflected on, and argued about by clients and policymakers around the world. I'm still writing them, along with others at Bridgewater, and expect to continue to write them until people don't care to read them or I die. In addition to providing clients with these observations and advice, I began to manage their exposures by buying and selling on their behalf. Sometimes I was paid a fixed fee each month, and sometimes I received a percentage of the profits. Among my consulting clients during the period was McDonald's, which was a huge beef buyer and Lane Processing, then the largest chicken producer in the country. I made them both a lot of money, especially lane processing, which did even better from its speculations in the grain and soy market than it did from raising and selling chickens. Around this time, McDonald's had conceived of a new product, the Chicken McNugget, but they were reluctant to bring it to the market because of their concern that chicken prices might rise and squeeze their profit margins. Chicken producers like Lane wouldn't agree to sell to them at a fixed price because they were worried that their costs would go up and they would be squeezed. As I thought about the problem, it occurred to me that in economic terms, a chicken can be seen as a simple machine consisting of a chick plus its feed. The most volatile cost that the chicken producers need to worry about was the feed prices. I showed Lane how to use a mix of corn and soy meal futures to lock in costs so they could quote a fixed price to McDonald's. Having greatly reduced its price risk, McDonald's introduced the McNugget in 1983. I felt great about helping making that happen. Damn. So Ray Dalio created the Chicken McNugget. Shit. I identified similar types of price relationships in the cattle and meat markets. For example, I showed cattle feeders how they could lock in strong profit margins by hedging good price relationships between their cost items. Bracket, feeder cattle, corn, and soy meal, close bracket. And what they were going to sell, open bracket, fat cattle, close bracket, 6 months later. I developed a way of selling different cuts of fresh meat for future delivery at fixed prices, far below frozen meat prices, but that still produced a big profit margins. Combining my clients' deep understanding of the way the machines of their own businesses operated with my knowledge of the way markets functioned worked to our mutual advantage, while making the markets more efficient overall. My ability to visualize these complex systems gave us a competitive edge against those who were shooting from the hip, and eventually changed the way these industries operated. And as always, it was a kick to be working with people I liked. On March 26, 1978, my wife gave birth to our first son, Devon. To have a child was the most difficult decision I ever made, because I couldn't know what the experience would be like, and it would be irrevocable. It turned out to be the best decision, my best decision. While I won't delve into too much into my family life in this book, I pursued it with the same sort of intensity with which I pursued my career, and I linked them. To give you an idea about how interwoven they were in my mind, Devon was named after one of my oldest breeds of cattle known to man, among the first breeds imported into the US and renowned for its high fertility. Whew. Number 2, his inability to meet his obligations, especially his margin calls at brokerage houses, could have led to cascading defaults. I don't know what the fuck was that, but yeah, there's like a note at the end. Don't know if you guys can read that. I don't know what you call those notes. You guys maybe can comment down below and let me know. But yeah, anyways, it's done for today. Page 31 now, and yeah, see you guys tomorrow. Peace.